Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Sparks in the Dark. We are so thrilled to have all of you here today to listen in and kind of be part of this conversation that we have with our guests today. I just want to start the show off by saying this episode is going to be a little bit different for Travis and I than the 2 episodes we've had before and our whole original idea with Sparks in the Dark. Today, we wanted to have a really in-depth discussion about diversity and empathy. And we really wanted to do that from an honest and real perspective. And so our guests, as well as Travis and I today, are reflecting ourselves and our own personal beliefs and our personal opinions. What we share today is thoughts and ideals that we have that don't necessarily reflect maybe our districts or our schools or the students or the parents or the families. And so we just want to start by up front, but just making it really clear that today we speak on behalf of ourselves in the topics we're going to discuss.
All right, so having said that, let's jump on into episode 3, Sparks in the Dark podcast, where we're able to talk about topics related to reading and writing. But although that's what we usually do, today we're going to deviate from that and just delve into a conversation. We like to have conversations that deepen our understanding and the way that we view things. And we want to invite you with us today as we discuss diversity and empathy. I want to start with a quote from Maya Angelou, who said that in diversity, there is beauty and strength. And as we're gathered here today, all 5 of us to chat, I want us to, diversity and something that is, empathy as well, and how we can build that. There is so much beauty that comes about when diverse people congregate, and whenever we do something which, we accept those around us and we listen to them. We bring them into our circle and we hear what they have to say, and we give them a place to speak and time, and we hear them out. And whenever we do that, we develop empathy ourselves, but we're also showcasing that for other people. And so once again, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today.
So I guess we'll start with having our panel kind of introduce themselves. So we'll go left to right. So Dana, you want to start?
Hello, my name is Dana. I am an educator. I've been an educator for going on my 19th year this year. So different perspective, different roles, but I'm happy to be here to be able to join in, united as educators, to be able to have conversation that we as educators are really, really reluctant to be able to have, but if we don't say something, nobody will. So I'm just glad to be here to be able to spark the interest and to be able to hopefully enlighten somebody out there to start standing up for what is right.
Lynn?
Hi, I'm Lynn Colon. I've been in education for 12 years. I'm originally from Puerto Rico and have been practicing in Texas and now in Virginia. I'm super excited to have this conversation and join people who are not afraid to talk about these topics.
Thank you. Steven?
And I'm Steven Lamkin. This is my 12th year in education. I've served a couple different roles. Currently, I'm a building principal, and I'm really honored to be asked to be here and to be part of this conversation. Part of my journey as an educator over the past couple years, especially, has been getting more connected beyond just my campus and my school, and getting involved through social media with the goal of learning and growing myself. And so I'm excited about this conversation, kind of a little bit selfishly, just for my own learning and what I'm going to gather and gain just from being with you all and your very unique and different perspectives.
Thank you all.
All right, well, thank you so much. All right, so we're going to jump in here, and we're going to get to one of the more controversial ones first. So let's start with talking about Charleston. What was it like for each of you seeing this play out? I'm sorry, Charlottesville. I apologize.
I think, confusion, I'll jump in first, is the first word that comes to my mind when I think about how things started unfolding and what I was seeing on the news and through social media. And I don't know that I've really come much farther in my understanding in all of it beyond confusion, just not understanding how these things that are so tragic continue to happen in our country, confusion about the response from our leaders, and confusion about how do we promote and bring about change from the places that we are. Confusion, it seems like such a simple word, but it's really the only word that I feel like really conveys kind of how I've felt over the past week.
I'll jump in. I mean, for me, fear and sadness, because being here, I've always felt like I'm living the American dream, and I have twin girls, and they saw it before I did, and the responsibility of just explaining to them what was happening when I didn't have as much background myself. I was afraid. I was afraid. I remember we were eating and they said, "Mom, hey, what's going on?" So fear and just sadness that I had to go back and explain what was really going on with them, and not being able to shelter them from what was going on.
I can say for myself, I started getting the feeds on my phone, on just hearing about it. I personally have actually stopped watching the news, to be honest with you, because I have been so disheartened and disgusted and angry in regards to, you know, just different aspects that have been going on. So when I saw the feeds, I looked at it and I was like, wow, you know, I almost was not surprised, to be honest with you, because things have continued to become escalated more and more within this last month. But when I finally turned on the TV, I could say it was, for myself, anger, disgust, but also a sense of sadness, and also just to reflect back that us as African Americans, or just any type of minority, we have worked so hard as a country to be able to come together, and just to be able to be witnessing something that I've heard my forefathers or my parents or grandparents talk about, that I'm now living in the year 2017, it was pure disgust. I'm going to be honest with you, and I had to actually turn it off because I was getting angry.
Yeah, and so Steven, when you were talking about you know, the confusion, I could see confusion on your face when I said Charleston instead of Charlottesville. So I really do apologize. I was thinking about I'm sorry. I was thinking about something else while I was trying to speak, and I apologize. You know, Dana, I want to speak to something that you said very quickly. You know, as you know, this point in our lives and where we are as a nation, and the progress that we've seen. Even though it probably in the grand scheme of things has not been a lot, you know, we're seeing some progress. And then to see something like this, you know, I can, you know I was disgusted, but I know that, you know, you had to be very disgusted as well. I mean, how do we go now from, you know, I guess, you know, from here, it just seems like, you know, we're all going to be going into a classroom or into a school talking to students.
Well, and you know, and I want to play off that, Travis, and I want to ask, and Dana, you may be the best one to answer this too, but to think of, you know, and taking that, you know, it's one thing to speak to a class full of white students and talk to them about building empathy for others, and, you know, we need to be careful of things that we say, and this is wrong, and things like that. But I can just imagine, and well, I can't imagine, but I mean, I can just think of, you know, as an African American, that's got to be such a much more deeper personal attack and a conversation that you have, and do we have a different conversation with the kids? I mean, how do we even begin with this with our students?
Well, to be honest with you, Todd, before we can have the conversation with our students, we need to be able to have the conversation with our adults, because it's our adults that, or our parents, that are forming these opinionated biases, ugly hatred that is going on in this world. So I totally agree. Like I said, I'm just saying, as educators, like, we can't be afraid to be able to have the conversation. Just today at work, I was telling my just a small team that I had that I would be doing this, and you know, one of my assistant principals, who's a white female, was like, I've been wanting to talk about it, to be able to ask, but I'm afraid to ask. Not that I'm afraid to ask you, because we have a very good relationship, but I've just been afraid to bring it up because nobody talks about it. She said, we're all walking around here acting like everything's okay when it's not. And then she gave me a quote today. It says, first they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me. So I thought that that was very powerful, that we've got to be able to talk with it. I'm just saying, as educators, as far as our children, I asked my husband, we just have to be able to have the conversation of the realities of where we are, you know, almost to the point I would say of don't sugarcoat it. As African Americans, our parents don't sugarcoat anything. And I'm not trying to, you know, play the race game or everything, but that's one thing is like, you are Black, and no matter what, people are going to see you as an N-word. No matter how educated you are, no matter how beautiful you are, this, that, or the other, when you walk into a room, people are going to see you. There's going to be a group of people that are just going to see you as another N-word. And you know, that is the realities that I had my parents have to tell me, and that we've had to tell my son and my daughter, because that is the world that we live in. And although I never thought that it would come to fruition, we're there having the conversation that I've warned my kids about. So I would just be able to say that we continue to not make it the elephant in the room, and that we spark conversations that are just keeping it real. I would just be able to say, with maybe just with a small group, because you have to walk on so many eggshells in education, but if we don't address it, then the cycle continues, and then we become silent, and then people become to make decisions for us, exactly where we are now.
Well, you know, and
So
I thought you made a really good point, Dana. And this is something you and I have talked about as well. And so with this, I think, you know, when Travis and I started talking about this at first, we were talking about how, you know, this was so impactful to us thinking about this weekend, that it was like, we can't not have this conversation. Both Travis and I sat down and said, we need to have this. And as educators, and you know what, I agree with your assistant principal that, you know, sometimes as a white, especially a white male, knowing that, I mean, it's, I don't want to offend anybody, but I want to have the conversation. But it's always like, well, where do I begin? And you've got to have those relationships built to really dive into it honestly. And so that was the point of having this show tonight, is to allow us to really be able to dive into this and start that conversation that hopefully inspires more educators to continue talking about this.
Right. And I just want to add, Todd, that if you don't say anything, then you're depicted as you having the same view as others. So I just want to be able to say, and it's not based on anything that I don't know about you, but because you are white, that if you don't speak, I'm saying as an African American, I'm like, well, he agrees with what's going on, so I choose not to. I mean, I know that that's not who you are, but just like many Blacks say guilty by association, it could go the same way to say guilty and white by association. It can be flipped very, very easily.
Right.
Dana, you have inspired three things, and I want to say these very quickly. One, that poem, or it's actually, I think it's by Martin Niemöller. It was written in the midst of or after World War II. And, you know, when you think about it in that light, and then, you know, think about it now, the second thing I was going to say, silence gives consent. And if we're silent about it, we're saying that, you know, even though, what is that, the Elie Wiesel said that, you know, whenever we try to remain neutral, we choose the side of the oppressor. And, you know, we have to speak out. We have to say, you know, no, I don't agree with this. And the third thing is, I've been so compelled recently to read. And I'm a voracious reader anyway, but I'm reading things about people of, you know, different backgrounds, different, you know, diversified literature. And I'm pushing it into the hands of my students, because if I don't do that for them, who's going to?
Right. Right.
But do you think that people are just afraid of the repercussions? Because I'm going to tell you, I read The Hate You Give and Small Great Things, and I came back excited about the books, and I just wanted to talk about it and share it with people. And I could see how some looked at me a little like, really? Are we talking about this? You're excited about this? you know, and some didn't agree, but I'm not going to stop having the conversation because you feel uncomfortable. And I will tell you, again, the fear for me is because I am not from here. So I have been excited about this American dream, and to see that some people feel that I don't belong here or I should not be here, it's really scary because I feel that I've contributed as much. And I'll tell you, I get the looks of, oh, you're not from here and you get to lead a building, or you've been recognized, you know, here or there. And it hurts. It hurts a lot. So I'm just ready to be a disruptor, or I mean, whatever people want to call it. But there's a place and there's a need to have this conversation, because if not, people, we're in trouble. We're in trouble right now just because we are afraid. So we need to stand up.
And, you know, and I think it's important to bring that up, that, you know, we need to stand up and we need to stand against what's wrong as well. And one of the other reasons why we really want to have this conversation is, you know, we have the leaders of our country, and one in particular who will say that both sides are at fault here. And I think all five of us could agree that that's not the case, that there is one side that is wrong, that came at this with hate in their hearts, that are very against a particular people or in a history. And we have to stand up and say that is wrong, and there is nothing about that that is right, and we do not support that at all. And we need to have people who show up and stand against hatred and stand against racism, and we have to make sure that all of our voices are rising to say that.
True. You know, our kids are watching, and we always talk about us being models. So if we show that we are afraid and we are not ready to have these conversations, the message that we're sending is, you need to be quiet. You don't stand up. You just close your mouth. So for me, it's modeling for my girls, because I don't ever want them to be afraid or feel that like they cannot have these conversations.
Well, and it makes me think of that phrase that you know, history is watching. And I feel like we are at a huge turning point right now as a country, where our kids are going to look back at this when they're older and say, who stood up? Who said something? And you know, I'm reading The Nightingale right now, and in that book it deals with these two sisters in Paris during the Holocaust and all that, and it just has me thinking of, are people going to look back at this time with all of this racial tension that we have, and all these hate mongers everywhere, and are they going to look at it and say, who was standing up for the people in that moment? Who was fighting for their rights? We can't just have the oppressed be the only ones speaking out.
And tangentially related to this is all of the other stuff that's been, you know, going around it, where we live in an environment where it's okay to speak out against people of color, where it's okay to be sexist, where it's okay to mock the disabled. And, you know, it's just, this to me is being normalized. And
Yep. And so, you know, thinking about, let's talk a little bit about, you know, the history of our country, because I think that's part of the conversation now too, especially when it comes to this removal of monuments thing, and people say, you know, they need to stay up, and you have the one side that says no, they need to stay there because it's part of the history, and then you look at it and you think, you know, that belongs in a museum, that doesn't belong out in public as a constant reminder of the oppression that happened in that. Is it important to continually talk about those kind of things? Or, as some people say, is it one of those that you just move on and it's part of history kind of thing?
I'm just going to say personally, our kids don't know their history. I'm saying African American, Hispanic, white, they don't know their history. Blacks know Martin Luther King pretty much, I'm saying, because that's all we teach. So, and I'm saying even as adults, we don't educate ourselves in history. So you know, that can go twofold. I think that's a minimal problem to a bigger problem, but we need to be able to teach our history, and you all know as educators that's something that we're teaching less and less of, but that we need to be able to And I mean, just saying the history of the right to vote, because all of the people who did not vote because they didn't feel that one candidate or the other was a better choice, we have that right to vote and to be able to explain to our children the history that has gone through for women, for just minorities to be able to vote. And I think it was a huge wake-up call, I know, for many of my family members who decided not to vote, that look, because of the reason you didn't vote, this is what happened. But all of my Black family, of course, voted for President Obama because it was like, I believe in him and what he can do. And then you saw what happened when everybody, not just Blacks, came together because they believed in wanting something better to happen. So I'm just saying, just those civil rights that we have as just Americans to be able to have, that we need to be able to teach our kids, because they don't understand the history that has led us to a better world, but now we're going backwards. I don't know if that makes sense, but just want to say that.
And I think,
and Lynn, we
said,
go ahead, Steven.
Dana, there, and just that it does start with us as adults making sure that we're educated on the history. Because quite honestly, this whole monument thing, I didn't know what to think at first, because I honestly don't feel like I don't know enough about the history of some of these different things that are up, and why do they need to come down or stay up. And if we aren't being proactive as educators in making sure that we're educated, how can we be expected to have those kind of conversations with our kids and model that for them? So it ultimately, there's a responsibility on us as educators to make sure that we are informed.
Absolutely.
Well, and Lynn, we had a brief conversation before the show tonight that even some of you were talking about how some of the students that you serve and some of the families that you serve, that there's fear in there, and that even your enrollment is down because of some of those fears.
It is, and we keep wondering what is going on, and thinking, okay, maybe they're leaving because of fear, and that hurts, because I believe in the work that we do. And I worry, okay, where are they going to go? And are they going to have the same experience? But I can't blame them if that is the reason, because, I mean, you got to protect your family. You got to feel safe. And it's just hard right now. It's really, really hard. And it's a lot of students here in our area. So we will see what happens once we open the doors, but it is scary, because now not only are they afraid, but they're going to miss out on good education.
Mm-hmm. So why do you three and Travis, why do we think that race has still such a deep hold into, because there were a lot of people who showed up to be hate mongers, and so why is this race conversation still such a big issue that we just not delved deep enough and opened the wounds deep enough for us to really address it?
No, we don't address it. We don't.
I think people are just afraid.
Yes,
they're just afraid of having the conversation. I will tell you, I think they're in a social setting, maybe, right? Because we can go back to loving each other and having a relationship. But when we're talking about formal settings and workplace, it's scary, and I can see why some people are quiet. But I will tell you something, a statement that I learned this summer, and I'm going to embrace it and own her, is if you are not sitting at the table, you're part of the menu, right? So I want to be a changing agent. I want to stand up for what I believe, and I want to do what's right. I can do it while I love people who think differently, but I'm not going to stop because you feel uncomfortable.
Right.
That's just the way it has to be, because being silent means I agree with you. And again, I think there's a lot of people that can benefit from us modeling and taking stand of what is right.
And I just think the awareness of our culture diversity, as I said, I work with a lot of Hispanics also, in that some teachers who might not know the Hispanic culture, you know, I've said this before, expects them to look them in the eye. But that in some Hispanic, that's a sign of disrespect when you're looking somebody in the eye. They're supposed to have their head down. Or just this year, I continually had to have conversations with a group of teachers about an African-American girl in their class, that they felt that she was disrespectful because she always stood up for what it was that she had to say. And they kept saying that she was disrespectful. So when in speaking to her mom, it says, it's not about being disrespectful. I've taught my daughter that she needs to speak up for herself when somebody is accusing her of doing that. However, because that is something that is instilled not only in her as a girl, but just in African Americans and many cultures, to be honest with you, the Hispanic culture too, especially my Puerto Rican counterparts are not afraid to be able to speak up for themselves, but that's seen as not. I know that it's seen as being, you know, sassy or disrespectful. And she was given, you know, lunch detentions and different things. And I had to be able to sit with them and to be explained to them as she's not doing that. Like, her mom is a victim of domestic abuse, and she saw her mom have to fight and speak up for herself because she was getting her tail beat. And that's what she's allowed. That's what she's taught her daughter. Like, don't let anybody be able to abuse you. So just the cultural awareness that we need to be having, it's lacking. And like you said, in books, why are we afraid to be able to bring those books? But we can read a beautiful book like Wonder, where it has pretty much the same message, but, you know, just about being able to accept somebody for their differences. And that is interpreted, and then we have beautiful book studies, and we're just going to change the world, this, that, or the other. So how is that any different than talking about race? When you can embrace that with somebody with a disability, to be able to see they can overcome, why can't, and that they're a part of society, why can we not transition to that same conversation about, like, the hate we give? I just don't understand it.
It takes vulnerability. I think we just have to be vulnerable. And I'll be right now, we serve a very diverse population, and a lot of our children look African American, right? And when you look at the subgroups, they're classified as Black. And the more and more I learned about them, they were not African American, they were African, which means that the way they're disciplined is totally different. The parent involvement is totally different. So as a leader, I had to, you know, learn more about their culture and how to support them, because it's totally different from the African American culture, and be vulnerable with my community about my shortcomings. But if we're not willing to do that, then we're never going to get there.
Well, and I'm going to add this in here, and please correct me if I'm wrong. You know, in thinking about, you know, why it's so, you know, it's just difficult, you know, to move in a, you know, in a good place with this conversation. I feel like so many people have just accepted the status quo. Yes. Like, in order for things to change, disrupt. I mean, you know, there has to be a disruption. You know, people, unfortunately, a lot of people are not moved unless their day is disrupted, unless what they're used to is disrupted, unless, you know, the things that they're used to getting to or having, you know, that's taken away from them. And we've just, you know, I feel like so many people have just accepted that as in, you know, well, you know, eventually it'll stop or something. And it breaks my heart, because, you know, I believe everybody should be invited to the table. I feel like everybody should have be a part of the conversation. But in thinking about that, let's move now and talking more about the broader definition of diversity. So many people, whenever they think about it, they start and they think, you know, it's just race. It has to do with what we look like on the outside. Talk a little bit here about the broader definition of diversity, and what are some ways that we can teach our kids about the different types of beautiful diversity that exist within our country, within our world?
Steven, you want to take this one?
Yep, I was just going to say, I'm going to jump in. I love love that conversation because it does, for all of us, I think we hear that word diversity and that's immediately what our mind goes to, is race. But it is so much more than that, as you referred to, a couple of minutes ago, Dana, when you were talking about, books like Wonder and things like that are coming more to the forefront. But still, as a whole, I feel like the conversation, we're not all the way there yet. For me, the unique perspective I hope to bring to this conversation is that I have cerebral palsy, which you would never know from seeing me here up. So that's something that I was born with. It's just part of my story, as I've grown up. And certainly there have been challenges, that come along with that. But also no challenges I think that are any greater than any of us face in those different ways. There's an amazing TED Talk, if you have not seen it, by Maysoon Zayed, who is an Arab American with cerebral palsy, and she is a comedian. And in the TED Talk, she says, people with disabilities are the largest minority population in the world, but we're the most underrepresented in the entertainment industry. And that was a huge kind of breakthrough moment for me when I heard her say that, to think, wow, because while, books like Wonder and things like that are starting to come out, that hasn't been the case. And that piece of the conversation has not been brought into the light. And for me, one of the pieces that I love about being in education is being able to, when I walk into a room, the first thing that people notice about me is my disability. In the same way that, Dana, I think you said earlier, there's times where you walk into a room and that's all people are going to see you as is the color of your skin. But helping people move beyond that and see the capabilities and the abilities and the passions and the desires that I have. I just love to be able to model that for kids and interact with them on a daily basis. Sometimes, yes, it's conversations about it, but more often than not, I don't have one-on-one conversations with the majority of my students in my school about my disability, but I'm hoping that just the example of being doing kind of life with me on a daily basis is giving them a picture that we don't all come in the same shapes and sizes and with the same ability levels. And that is part of what makes the world so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think, Dana's mentioned it, Lynn has mentioned it, and Steven, you've mentioned it about how, something that I think that Travis and I and many Caucasian people take for granted is just this whole, how do I put this? Like, Dana, you mentioned it, that and Steven just reiterated it, that when you walk into a room, people are seeing you, seeing the color of your skin. Steven, you said, when you walk in a room, people are looking at the braces on your leg or anything like that. And, Lynn, you mentioned about even having that misconception about the students, the color of their skin, and thinking they were African-American, but they were actually African. I think that's something that Caucasian, I take for granted, that doesn't cross my mind when I walk into a room. And when I think about having this conversation of diversity, it's really taking the time to really get to know that. Because one thing that Steven and I talked about that I'd love to move into here is, Steven and I yesterday were talking about opportunities that are not opportunities, but experiences he's had where somebody has grossly misjudged him or his capabilities based on exclusively what they saw when he appeared on scene. Steven, do you want to kind of share one of that, like what you were telling me about the restaurant you were at?
Yeah, so I have, I drive, and I of course have handicap tags on my license tag, and I was in college and we were going out to a restaurant with some buddies late in the evening, and we pulled in, I was driving, pulled into a handicap spot, got out, and before I walked around the car, the manager happened to be standing outside and said, you guys know that's a handicap spot, right? And he finished the sentence kind of as I walked around the table and, or around the car, excuse me, and he realized, oh yeah, there is a need for that. And you could tell he just you wanted to shrink, but it was that quick judgment of when you see some college guys pull in, and again, you can only see from here up and nothing looks different. There's a quick judgment. You know, there was another experience where I was in a restaurant also with some friends, and I was using my wheelchair. I have a wheelchair that I use for longer walking distances. And when the waiter came around to take the order, they turned to my friend instead of looking right at me and said, "And what would he like?" Again, making the assumption that because I was in a wheelchair, that there was, you know, a mental disability as well. And, you know, when I then spoke up and placed my order myself, you know, again, you saw that reaction, you know, and that face of almost despair when the person realized what they've done. But those are the kind of gut reactions that stereotypes bring about.
Stephen, I just wanted to say, just listening to you right now, because when Travis was talking, actually Todd, when you were talking about that, all I kept thinking in my head was the term that we're hearing about: white privilege, white privilege, white privilege. And Stephen, just listening to you, being a white male, you know, they didn't see you until you came around the car, but it was just the white privilege of I'm just like everybody else. But that we also have to say, when you say it's not just about color, that it's about diversity also, that we can quickly say that there are white males that have struggles too, you know, because of not a disability, it could be just of anything. So by you telling your story, have just softened my heart in regards to that, because when Todd was talking, I was like, Todd, you don't know that because it's the whole white privilege. You know, you have had opportunities because of, you work your butt off, but I'm saying, just when you hear people say white privilege, it's just different. But you broke a barrier with me, Stephen, you saying that by telling your story. And we've just been on the air, 40 minutes, and I've already been impacted by somebody's story to be able to have me look at things in a different perspective. So that's why we said, and this is adult to adult, and now I can go tell that story to somebody else at my campus or a child that comes in there. So this conversation like this, you know, has just made an impact on me, just listening to your story right there. So, and it's not a therapy session. It's not a big town hall meeting. It's a small group of us being able, each one of us have learned something different about each other's, you don't want to say race, but just as a human being. And we need to start looking at each other as human beings and not black, white, this, that, or the other. So I thought that was a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that story.
Thank you, Dana. And as you were just talking, you made me think of, you know, we all deal with struggles and we all have challenges. And, you know, mine is out there for the world to see. You know, like I said, when I walk into a room, you can't help but know what my challenges and my struggles are. But that doesn't mean that everybody in the room doesn't have challenges also and hasn't overcome things in their life. You know, I was talking to a friend earlier and said, you know, I go to therapy every week. I go to physical therapy because that's what my body needs. You know, this friend of mine said he goes to therapy every week too for, you know, different issues that are, you know, address, you know, mental and anxiety and depression, you know, but just because mine are out there and you can see, in some ways that gives me an advantage because it is easier for people to see the struggle and want to have empathy. But those people that are dealing with silent battles that no one knows about, you know, we have to be so careful not to jump to those assumptions ourselves.
But then I just want to talk, in education, we tend to put our students in boxes. And I think that's where it starts.
Label them.
Because I know for me, when I walk into the room, of course, with my mouth closed, because once I speak, you know, you can tell I'm Hispanic, but people try to figure out, well, is she this? Is she that? The texture of the hair. And some flat out ask, what are you? And I'm thinking, what does it matter? I'm Lynn. I'm confused. Right. I mean, do I need something? So early on, we're dividing kids into, okay, the black, the white, the Hispanic, the Asian, who's poor, who's, you know, not free and reduced, who has a disability. And we group them accordingly in most cases. We look at data accordingly in most cases. So we're talking about addressing adults, but in education, that's how we are treating kids.
Yeah.
We're putting them in subgroups.
And that's why it's so important for us to just be just having these conversations, because I mean, I think Dana, you just made a killer point of, you know, even just us five sitting here together. I think all of us are taking something away from this, just in respects to understanding each other better, and the backgrounds we come from. And that's why it's so important for adults to be having these conversations, because it grows us as individuals and it builds that empathy for others. And you don't have that empathy built when you refuse to have the conversation and when you're closed off to listening and learning about others, because it's very easy to make a snap judgment about someone based upon what you heard on the news or what you see when you see them walk in the room or what you've been raised as. And until you make that emotional connection with someone and their story, your opinions of them aren't going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And as educators, teachers, principals, whomever, we have the responsibility to be able to build those relationships. Yes, we have all types of pressures of accountability, but we have to take the time to be able to know our students, because if they're coming from a home that, I'm just saying as an African American, for someone to say like whites don't trust whites because white is always right, or, you know, from a white perspective, you know, don't be by the black kids because they're probably going to steal your things or this, that, or the other. It's our responsibility of educators to be able to have those conversations with our kids and to be able to model what it is as, like we said, as human beings and being relationships, to take the time to just bring everybody together in a circle and have that conversation and not be afraid to take the time to have that conversation. I mean, I'm just coming back to this 40 minutes and just impactful relationships and opening up our perspectives about each other and each other's race, each other's diversity. Because I know you don't want to go back to race. How, I mean, and powerful is that you could do the same thing with our classrooms or our staff or our custodians, because we're very quick to judge our custodians too many times, our cafeteria personnel, that we judge them because they only have a high school degree, some of them, and some not, you know, but their job is a lot harder than mine. Just, I hate Thanksgiving because I'm like, oh my God, how do they do this every day? But we don't take the perspective to be able to get their story a lot of times also, you know, so, and they love what they do, but people are so quick to be able to judge the cafeteria, but they love providing that food to our kids because with some, that's the only meal that they have. So just thank you for this opportunity. It's just been awesome.
You each have said something that I wanted to speak to, and just each of you just, you know, brings such a, you talk about things that Dana, you've been talking about how impacted you've been, how, you know, affected you've been by this conversation, and the thing that I keep thinking about is how beautiful this all is, because whenever people of different backgrounds, whenever people who, you know, we can talk about how, you know, it's important to have different people, but we want this to exist everywhere. You know, we want this type of inclusive environment where we can come together and we can talk. And Lynn, you're right. At school, we are so guilty of putting kids into boxes, of labeling them. And, you know, we build empathy for people, different kinds of people. And how else are we going to do that? Putting those labels in because this student gets pulled out for this and this student, and I know that they're extenuating circumstances and needs, but we're so, you know, I'm guilty of doing that. You know, I'm ashamed to say that, but I'm guilty of, you know, falling into labeling students because, you know, is it fair to say that, you know, teachers are conditioned to do that? We're conditioned to look at data and let that then drive. It's not right. It's not right. Well, that's something that I'm going to take back with me and try to change for this year. That's very important. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear that.
No, if I can say something, I had a breakthrough moment my first year as a principal, and when I eat lunch with some of the students, and we have diversity in religions as well. And we were talking about the standardized test, and there were girls from different religions, and they were talking about how they were praying to their God for, to help them during the assessment. And just to see the acceptance and how none of them were shocked and were respectful of their beliefs taught me a huge lesson, because, it's the love. I can love you regardless of what you believe in. And we can still be friends and eat lunch and share the table. So if kids can do that in such a beautiful way, why can't we?
Right.
One of the pieces when Todd and I had a conversation yesterday, I was saying that I think part of why I'm so drawn to working with kids, and I work in an elementary school, so I love the little ones, is because they are so not conditioned to stereotype. And so I was telling Todd at the beginning of every year, I go into every classroom and I read to introduce myself to the students. And I always bring up my disability because kids are going to see me, and I want to be honest with them and answer questions for them and talk to them about, what's a respectful way to ask questions and things like that. So we have that conversation. And, for about 2 weeks after that, there's kids that as they see me in the hallway, they'll ask other questions and things like that. But then it all just fades away, and they don't see those things. Our fifth graders, our librarian reads a book to them, and the main character in the story has cerebral palsy. And so every year she tells them as they're starting to read the book that they're going to have a special guest come talk to them when they finish the book that has cerebral palsy. And none of the kids ever figure out before I get there that it's me. And I love that because, yeah, they know that about me, but it's like they know that at the beginning of the year, but they forget it, and not in a bad, forgetful, pushing that aside. But kids are just so not conditioned to see those differences and just be so accepting. And it's disheartening to think what happens to us as we grow up that makes us think so differently and put those labels on people.
Travis?
Gosh, that's such another good point. Such another good point. All right, so one more question for you. Can you tell us, is there anything like literature-wise, book-wise, that you feel you would like to share, something that people could read? And I'm going to share just a little bit of background, and I promise I'll make this as brief as possible. But we like to be able to push books into the hands of our students, but also for people who are listening, fellow educators. What is something that you feel would be wise, something that would be helpful, something that would be affecting for people to pick up and read?
The Hate You Give touched me.
Yes,
That book.
Gosh, that book is amazing, isn't it?
amazing.
Yeah, and for adults, Small Great Things. I mean, when I saw what happened here in Virginia, I went back to those books. And interestingly enough, Todd recommended The Hate You Give, but Small Great Things by Jodi Picoult was recommended by a friend who is in a biracial marriage. And I loved both. Both just give a great perspective of what it is to be an African American, just trying to either fit in or explain your why.
Just want to say for the little ones, I know that we did the A is for activists, just to be able to just have that conversation of just standing up for yourself in regards to, any type of social justice. And it's just the ability that you have to be able to be an activist, even for your friends. When somebody is being a bully with your friends, that an activist doesn't mean something that's negative, because that's what people have to see. I can just say, like with Black Lives Matter, it got this whole negative aspect of people trying to be activists, and then it turned into a negative aspect. But that's a great book to be able to introduce to the little ones too. I mean, elementary sector.
Thank you for that, because I didn't know of that one, so I'm taking that back with me. The book that I had mentioned before that our librarian shares with our fifth graders is a book called Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper. And it's told from the perspective, the main character is a girl with cerebral palsy, much more severe than mine. She doesn't have the ability to speak or communicate. And she's in a school, and, you know, she's put in the special ed classrooms, but her mind, you know, is completely there and so abled and gifted. And it really shares a very unique perspective to hear from her, and kind of feeling trapped in a body and not being able to communicate and express. And it delves into, you know, the friendship issues, the family relationship, and what that's like at home. Brings a lot of neat perspectives to light.
Well, I've just got to say, the reason I love talking about books and getting book recommendations is each of you mentioned a book that I had not heard about, that I think, and they're all so different, whether it's A is for Activist, or whether it is Small Great Things, or Out of My Mind. I think they just sound like powerful reads. I'm like, okay, I want to go order them right now on Amazon just so I can have them coming in. So thank you for recommending all of those. I know from Travis and I, this was a passion of ours to have this conversation tonight. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for giving up an hour of your time to have this important conversation and to have it live and recorded for people to listen to, because I think that my hope is that this inspires others to continue to have the conversations as well, to stand up against injustice, to not just have the conversation, just like you said, Dana, not just have it with our kids, but to have it with our friends and with our colleagues and with adults, because we need to have it everywhere, and we can't stand silent, because just like expressed tonight, when you stand on the sidelines and you say nothing at all, you're standing with the oppressor and not with the oppressed. And we have such a responsibility, not only as humans and as American citizens, but also as educators, to show our kids that we are brave enough to stand against injustice. So thank you all for coming on tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much.
Travis, you have anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I just want to say that as we finish here, I appreciate all of you being a part of this conversation. And the thing that I, am just going to leave on is that we all have one thing in common. We're all a part of humanity. But we cannot forget that we each bring something different, something beautiful to this world, because we're all made differently. And we have something beautiful that we can contribute. And I appreciate each of you for bringing that beauty to our conversation tonight, because I feel that, in the words of Maya Angelou, we have had beauty and strength here tonight. Defied, wonderful, beautiful conversation.
We thank all of you for listening, and we hope that you continue the conversations for all of our listeners and viewers in your own lives, and to not let it rest within just this one episode. Travis and I look forward to having more Sparks in the Dark episodes in the future with different diverse panels. We don't want our conversation to stop with this either. And so though Travis and I will continue to talk about books with guests and talk about reading and writing instruction and just how to change lives with that, we also want to make clear that we also don't want this to be a one and done conversation. And we look forward to having many more panels on to continue talking about diversity and building empathy within kids. We hope everybody has a great day and evening, and we will see you all soon.